Hey everyone, welcome to the most opinionated space podcast on the internet, Ad Astra,
the podcast where we integrate space, policy, and technology.
I'm Jack.
And I'm Newton.
I have a Master's of Public Policy degree with a concentration in Science and Space Policy.
And I'm a PhD in Computer Science and an all-around tech geek.
All right, before we forget, make sure to follow us on Twitter at @AdAstra_podcast, like us on Facebook, and subscribe to our mailing list on elemental.fm to get regular updates from the team. And if you like what you hear, give us a review on iTunes and recommend us on Overcast. So first off today, before we get into this week's topics, we would like to congratulate the winner of our Earth in Human Hands giveaway, Katie Spencer. I caught up with Katie today at a Planetary Society event here in Washington, D.C. This is Monday, by the way. And I told her the good news. And here is audio from my conversation with her tonight. Hey, everyone. This is Jack of the Ad Astra podcast here with the winner of the David Grinspoon giveaway. Of David Grinspoon's newest book, Earth in Human Hands, Katie Spencer. Yay! Can you give us like 10 seconds, 30 seconds, something of how excited you are about this book?
I am just so pleased. I saw Dr. Grinspoon speak at AwesomeCon last year and was just so inspired by everything he was saying and really into his whole background in astrobiology. So I'm just really excited to read his new book.
Yeah, it's really good. So thank you, Katie, for entering the contest and following us on Twitter and Facebook and all the places that you follow us. Be sure to tune in on Wednesday for the newest episode. Cool.
Congrats, Katie. Thank you for listening both to the Ad Astra show and for entering the contest. Stay tuned for more space news, space policy news, space technology news, and for more contests. Don't think that one was going to be the only one that we're going to do.
That was just the beginning. Yeah. We're just getting started over here at the Ad Astra podcast.
So anyway, tonight we're going to be talking about the latest from Washington, where we give a little bit of news about Ted Cruz and his newfound interest in the Outer Space Treaty. We talk a little bit about our good friend Robert Zubrin, friend of the show. We'll talk about the space news highlight of the week. Where we get into the leaks coming from space.com, an anonymous source that space.com had access to, for the White House's FY 2018 budget request and how that relates to NASA itself. In international news, we'll talk about an emergency spacewalk that's being planned for Tuesday. And then in latest in tech, we'll chat a little bit about a NASA-tested origami-inspired robot, as well as a major topic of discussion that was buried in political news last week. And finally, and coming soon to space, we'll give you updates on that new Star Trek trailer. All right, so Jack, latest from Washington. Take it away.
All right. So we started off last week. So as everyone knows, we record on Monday nights. And so, of course, on Tuesday, something happened. So last week, the Atlantic had a sort of a summit mini conference, one-day event called On the Launchpad, which was all about sort of the next step in space exploration. And specifically in human space exploration. And one of the notable members of the panels, probably I would say the keynote of the entire event, was Senator Ted Cruz of Texas, our good friend Ted.
Another friend of the show.
Another friend of the show, as we say fondly.
Yeah.
So Senator Cruz was on stage on the 23rd last week, and he was talking about the Outer Space Treaty, which is a treaty from 1967. Less than 10 years after the launch of Sputnik, there was already a treaty on the legal framework of outer space. Longtime listeners will know we've talked about this before, but it's an old
Just to give
treaty.
a brief description, we refer to it as the Outer Space Treaty, as just its nickname, but it's actually called the Treaty on Principles Governing the Activities of States in the Exploration and Use of Outer Space, including the Moon and other celestial bodies, which is
rolls
which
right
is
off
why
the
we
tongue.
just call it the Outer Space Treaty. And it's basically a list of a series of principles. It's not overly descriptive, but really there's several key principles to this. And I probably should have listed these out before the show and put them in show notes. But the key principles are space is for everyone, but you can't claim it. So no laying claim to countries can't lay claim to any part of space, which is a little odd because Earth is a part of space, but that's semantics.
Well, it's the only part that we inhabit.
No weapons of mass destruction in orbit, no launching nukes in orbit and things like that, which we're probably going to violate that in like 10 years. Planetary protection, so no disrupting the biology or environment on other planets, and holding nations responsible for their space actions as sort of the fourth key principle, which basically means that if you are a private company operating in the US and you break one of those first three principles in space, the US in that case is held accountable for that. So SpaceX, which US based company, if it does something in space, if it decides to let off a nuke, let's say, which who knows if Elon has one of those in his back pocket, basically the US is held accountable at the world stage by this treaty.
It's very much focused on nation states.
Right.
I mean, think about it. This is a treaty from 1967. The only players in space really at that point were the U.S. and Russia.
Right, but how many people have signed that treaty now?
It's 106 by my last count.
Okay.
Yeah, well, 106 nations have signed it and ratified it, with many more who just agree that it's the law of space, not law of the land. It's law of the unland.
What's Cruz's issue with the Outer Space Treaty? Does he just want to get it in higher detail and basically update it, given that?
Not necessarily. So I'm looking at the text of the Outer Space Treaty, which we will link in the show notes. I could probably print this on one piece of paper, front and back. There is not a lot of description in here. And of the description that it does give, it's really only focused on nation states. I mean, it really only focuses on the major powers of the time, too. I mean, there's not really anything in here that mentions any state in particular. But there is sort of this understanding that the Soviet Union and the United States were the major players here. What Cruz wants to do is make the Outer Space Treaty more commercial friendly. And I'm doing air quotes on that because as it stands, the Outer Space Treaty really doesn't even mention commercial space. It really only talks about, again, this idea that the nation states are up there. And that's where you get these ideas of, so if you saw The Martian, there's the scene, or if you read it, there's the scene at the end where he says, all things that don't have rules are governed by maritime law. Therefore, I'm a space pirate. So that's where this comes from.
I see.
This is the source of that. And so what Cruz wants to do is to make it more streamlined, maybe even repeal the Outer Space Treaty and bring in another treaty that is focused specifically on allowing the commercialization of space. And so he's talking about the drilling of asteroids or other celestial bodies and taking the ore or materials that are on there and owning them. I mean, we heard this 2 weeks ago, or no, it was 3 weeks ago, that there was that panel discussion about commercial space in the Senate. And what they talked about was, it was Robert Bigelow from Bigelow Aerospace, as well as Blue Origin was there. I mean, there was a couple panelists, and they were talking about how are they going to divvy up the moon? Well, according to the Outer Space Treaty,
that's not a...
you can't, you can't have sovereignty in space. So what Cruz is proposing is to say, hey, you can have sovereign area in space, that people can lay claim to other celestial bodies, maybe not the entire thing. And there'd, of course, have to be some sort of legal framework for for implementing sovereignty in space. But he's like, let's do it. Like, let's allow commercial companies to go unimpeded into the great unknown, which I guess we'd have to take that in stride, because I mean, the Outer Space Treaty as it stands says no to that. We'd have to not only amend the Outer Space Treaty, but then add language or have a completely separate treaty, the Commercial Space Launch Treaty or whatever, that would sort of fill in those gaps that Cruz says exists, which they do exist. I mean, it's from 1967.
Right.
It is not all encompassing.
I'm going to say something that that you and our listeners probably never thought I'd say, which is I kind of see Ted Cruz's point. But that's recorded and now on record. But
we can't delete that.
I can't go back. Yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense to start drawing up new regulations, given that, well, in their case, it's not going to be regulations. It's going to be more along the lines of freedoms that are allowed by certain commercial organizations in space. I think, it makes sense if two companies are operating independent missions in space once SpaceX and Orbital get to that point. Which, I mean, they are right now, but just in low Earth orbit. But once they can actually conduct independent operations that are beneficial to those companies, further away for some reason, you will need sort of rules of engagement, rules of competition, rules of interaction between those two companies. If I'm conducting an operation, in Section 3B of the moon, those aren't real moon sections, and I decide to come in and I require Section 3C and Section 3B, I shouldn't be able to just kick you out. There should be rules in terms of use of those areas. But even rules in terms of use of those areas start to collapse because it starts to boil down to how do you lay claim to an area, who is doling out the time slots that you get in these areas, and how do you regulate how people can claim time slots, things like that. So it is complicated. I'm actually glad Congress is thinking about it, and that he's I think it says here that he's going to have a full-on hearing about it, which I think it's great. Start thinking about it now. Companies are doing this.
So by the time this episode airs, that hearing will have already happened.
Yeah.
So if you are listening to this and you did not listen in on the hearing that is supposed to take place tomorrow for us, which is yesterday for you if you're listening to this on Wednesday, we will link it in the show notes, a link to the hearing page, and from there you can watch it or listen to the audio from it. And I agree with you, Newton, that I think
you agree with Ted Cruz. Say it.
I agree with
Say
with the senator from Texas that something needs to happen. Do I agree with his approach, or maybe his idea of what it should look like? Maybe not necessarily.
I will rail on it once it's out. Well,
but like, this is something that he has, it seems almost just out of the blue. It seems like right after this April 26th hearing to his subcommittee about, that was the subcommittee the hearing that I was talking about where Robert Bigelow was there. It seems after that he has really sort of adopted commercial space as his issue. I mean, one, he's facing re-election in Texas. And Texas is a huge space state, with SpaceX building a new facility and Blue Origin building their facility there too. I mean, space is a huge industry in Texas. So of course he has to start talking about this, and especially the commercial aspect. But like, he's also just right that there's a lot of uncertainty out there, and we can't go about space the same way we have in these sort of isolated incidents where, we launch, a couple of years later we launch again. I mean, the cadence has picked up since then, and we have pretty regular launches, but as space gets routinized, we need to have routines for them to follow, right? Like we can't just let commercial space keep sort of existing in low Earth orbit and then kind of go to cislunar space if they win the Google X Prize, which is another thing that is probably prompted this discussion too, is the Lunar X Prize. But like what rules of the road are they supposed to be following?
Right.
There are none. I mean, there are some rules terrestrially, like where they can launch, how they can get a launch license.
Oh, I thought you were going to go back even further and start talking about, rules for discovery of new land on the planet, right? That's the only precedent that we have for this before. I believe the legal term, or the Latin term, it might be the legal term too, is terra nullius, which, it's just international law for describing territory that has never been subject to the sovereignty of any state, or which, some prior sovereignty was had, going all the way back to my poli-sci class freshman year.
Wow, I'm impressed by that level of Latin
amazing
knowledge.
Recall. But I mean, the Outer Space Treaty is going to have to. I mean, what we should be doing is taking whatever lessons we learn from developing those kinds of laws, and use those lessons as potentially paths forward for discovery of new lands without the whole, conquering living species that are there part.
Yeah. Well, I mean, hey, if there's Martians, just send
let's not colonize them this time. That would be.
Let's let them live in peace.
Yeah. How's that sound? Learning the lessons of the past, not just using what happened in the past.
So, there is that aspect of let's figure out what the rules are going to be. But then there's the actual getting it passed and getting it signed and getting it ratified by all the member states of, it would probably go to, if they use the framework of the United Nations, it would probably go to COPUOS, which is the Committee on Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. That's probably the best place, unless it goes to the legal subcommittee. There's weird things with the United Nations when it comes to space.
Yeah.
So even if we agree, like even if within the United States we agree, or even within Cruz's party agrees on the terms of the contract, they're still getting it passed by the Senate, getting it signed by the president, getting it cleared by the Secretary of State, getting it cleared by every foreign minister of a spacefaring nation, which as it stands is quite a lot of them. And then do we include commercial signatories too? We're treading into this new area that I think it is imperative that we address this problem now, because if we try to address this problem 20 years from now, when there are lunar bases or there are, commercial stations in orbit of either the Earth, Moon, or Mars, even, that's when things is going to get really hairy, because then you have, an exponentially larger number of stakeholders than you do now. Right. Like if you just have to engage with the existing space companies or space exploration companies, so your Blue Origin, SpaceX, ULA, Boeing, Lockheed, Aerojet, Rocketdyne, like there's a lot of them, but it's easier to manage. This, like in 20 years, it's almost going to be unmanageable, and we can't afford space to be a liability like that. So speaking of lunar bases, our friend, the friend of the show, Mr. Bob Zubrin, was also at the Atlantic's event last week.
Was he? What do you have to say?
So he was, on the launch pad, and he was on a panel talking to the audience and viewers at home, including myself, about the future of human exploration to the moon and beyond. And he claims that the Deep Space Gateway, the DSG, my beloved Deep Space Gateway, is, quote, the worst plan yet for NASA getting humans beyond low Earth orbit. Now, if people don't know who Robert Zubrin is, so he is the leader of the Mars Society, which in 1998 he made this big speech and came out with a book called The Case for Mars. And in it, he details an architecture of getting to Mars within 10 years, barring any budgetary constraints.
When you say architecture, to what level of detail was this architecture?
To a surprising level of detail. I mean, you would think, this is, it's in the space community. Like, this could be someone who doesn't know what they're talking about, is just kind of coming up with whatever they heard on the latest, episode of Star Trek or something. This could just be some crackpot theory. But he has an engineering background and actually went into some detail as to what his architecture for Mars would look like for a Martian mission. And even then, Newton, you're smiling.
No.
It is a cockamamie scheme. Mm-hmm. Can I say that? It's just not. It's not feasible because it does not take into account budgetary constraints and the changing national priorities over time. It assumes that this is just a follow-on to Apollo, that it lives out the Apollo fanboys' dream. The lunatics who aren't lunatics anymore, it sort of follows their dream of, okay, now we're going to Mars, and it's going to be unabated, and we're not going to have any constraints, and suddenly we're going to have 1 million people on Mars by 2015. Well, obviously that didn't happen. If it did, it's news to me. But so Zubrin went to this thing for the Atlantic and talked about just how terrible of an idea he thinks the Deep Space Gateway is. For what I heard at H2M a lot of was that this is just the ISS further away. Instead of a 3-hour journey, it's a 3-day journey.
Right. And I talked about on that last episode, this is us learning how to live outside of our basic low Earth orbit, right? That's what Deep Space Gateway is, and learning how to do experiments outside of that. I mean, granted, we're still technically in Earth's orbit along with the moon, but we're much further outside. We're able to do much more experimentation, and if you want to conduct a certain type of a mission the level of Mars, and we've talked about how difficult this mission is on the last 3 episodes, you have to do some sort of experimentation in a relevant environment, right? That's not, you can't get around that. And just doing things on Earth and taking one shot at it is not going to cut it. So I'm not, but continue. Why does he think that the Deep Space Gateway is not?
So he considers this, he calls it a lunar spaceport, considers it a waste of money, and he even says that it's a dumber idea than the asteroid redirect mission. So he published a piece in the National Review, saying that it is quote, amazingly, the space station has managed to come up with an even dumber idea than the asteroid redirect mission.
I'm actually not going to agree with Robert Zubrin and Ted Cruz on the same episode. But I would say that the asteroid redirect or retrieval mission, it was a mission where if we didn't have all of these other priorities, I would be all for it just from the science gain that you get from it. But I do agree that the asteroid retrieval mission should not have been a priority for NASA and I believe that was near era of the Obama administration. With that said,
I agree. Continue.
With that said, the Deep Space Gateway is a necessary, not just engineering step, but a necessary science step for a necessary science and engineering step for on the way to Mars. And like I said last week, my only concern, and I believe you agreed with this, is that we get bogged down continuing to do the Deep Space Gateway and staying in cislunar orbit for decades as opposed to going to Mars. But it's still a necessary step in terms of going to Mars, and I'm hoping that it gets treated that way. And from everything we've seen, at least all of the external advertisements and things like that, it's being treated that way. So,
I just think Bob is just out of step with the entire community and with where government is going.
Right. I mean, this is I'm sorry, but this is the guy who thinks that that we should have a plan to send humans to Mars in like 8 years. Last I checked.
Yeah, well, of course, him and Donald Trump would get along great.
Yeah, absolutely.
But so like his whole idea is predicated on the idea, or predicated on the notion that budgets don't exist and that you can just kind of throw money at something and eventually it'll happen.
Yeah, just throw money at engineering. That the more money you throw at it, the less years it'll take. That's inevitably true, right?
It's asinine. For us in the policy community, it just makes us like cringe at the idea that people actually think that, you can just, I'm going to pay SpaceX like umpteen $billion and then suddenly I'm going to be able to go to Mars in like 3 years. That's not how this works, right? Like that's not how it has worked previously. There's no indication that that's how it works now. And there's no history then or example to base any future predictions on this model. He calls the Space Launch System a program adrift. He doesn't get, I don't think, the way that governments have to go about doing things like this. I mean, because sure, if
or the
we
way
really
that engineers have to go about doing things like this, like you have to test. All right, you do.
Let's assume that his idea is or his foundation is correct. That if you give engineers enough money, they can do something in less time. Let's just assume that. Even if that were the case, they would probably build something that wasn't tested properly or wasn't tested at all, and so isn't at all safe for human transport. And so then you send basically a tin can full of 4 to 6 astronauts to Mars, bathe them in radiation, and then what? You have to fly them back to bury them? Like what? It doesn't make sense to do this type of mission in such a short amount of time. Sure, Apollo we were able to do within a decade because there were this confluence of factors. I mean, you had the geopolitical pressure, you had the cultural context, you had a legacy of a recently assassinated president that you had to keep. There was also the organizational aspect of it that like we have not seen in NASA or even within the Department of Defense since, or at least in the same capacity. So assuming you can just throw money at this problem and send people there it just makes no sense. I mean, again, we were able to do this under Apollo because there are all the confluence of factors, and then also it's only 3 days away as opposed to Mars, which is 6 months
and
away.
Once again, I don't want to talk about Apollo as if it wasn't hard. It was I said this before. It was the hardest thing we'd ever done up until that point. And now Mars is the hardest thing we've ever done up until this point. I mean, we've detailed the number of issues, from technology-based issues to biology to psychology. There's so many different aspects of, so many different advancements in different scientific fields have to be made. Entire fields, not just engineering, have to be made in order for us to do this mission. So it doesn't make sense to just keep rushing this and not do it in a way that's strategic, that's tactical, and that at the end of the day ensures that whoever we do send to Mars stays alive there and back.
Yeah, I mean, we have to be smart about this. I mean, we're sinking every year 19 point something billion dollars of taxpayer money into programs. I mean, a lot of that, a good chunk of that does not go to the Mars missions, but it's getting to the point, I mean, with the Human Exploration Budget and the Science Mission Directorate, which you could include, the Mars 2020 rover, the future orbiters, and whatever else comes after that as precursors for human missions and include that in the cost. Like, you can't rush those things, and you have to do them smart. Like, that's billions of dollars every year, let alone, the maybe $100 billion over the lifespan of this program, which in, a government context isn't actually that much money, but like, that's still taxpayer money that you want to just throw it into a moonshot program. We have to build the infrastructure. We have to build the know-how, the organizational understanding that allows us to not only send humans to Mars, but to continue sending humans to Mars. Under a Zubrin plan, it'd be like a one shot and then poof, nothing. I think so. Our actual friend of the show, John Logsdon, professor emeritus at the Space Policy Institute at George Washington University. Hello, Dr. Logsdon, if you are listening, says Robert has always lived in a parallel universe of what ought to be rather than what is.
Yep. And
I think that hits the nail right on that, hits the Bob Zubrin nail right on the head. So I guess that's all I really have to get off my chest about this. I mean, if you want, we can have a lengthier discussion offline.
Well, that's just the warm up for the next.
Yeah, I'm like heated. I'm ready to go. Yeah, my engine's full blast. So as I was sort of talking about, so budgets are important, right? I guess that's how things run, right? I guess there's money involved at some point. And as this episode airs, it'll be one day after the 2018 presidential budget request has come out. We are recording Monday night. We are using information made available to us from Jeff Faust over at Space News, as reported on space.com, talking about this 2018 budget proposal and what it means for NASA. Across the board, I mean, we could talk for hours endlessly, and you are going to hear this on the news. You're going to hear this on every other podcast you listen to about how bad this budget is across the board. But we're here to talk specifically about NASA and how this budget doesn't necessarily make NASA okay again.
So it looks like in this budget, science would receive a little more than $5.71 billion for NASA, which is about $53 million less than what it received in 2017. So that's a $53 million cut to science. Planetary science, something that's fairly close to you and I, Jack, given some of our work with the Planetary Society. That would go down about $54 million. No surprise here. The administration would request $1.8 billion for Earth science, which is about $121 million less than appropriated for 2017. And we don't have numbers on what was, or the details of what was actually cut. Like Jack said, that will come out tomorrow. But these are just proposed cuts. So $121 million.
It's pretty top line at this point.
Right.
Right. For NASA, at least, it's just the director. It's so I was looking at other parts of the spreadsheet that got leaked. That there were some programs, namely something like the Food and Drug Administration, because that's what I was doing at work today, was looking at that budget. It's just across the board, like 30% cut right off the top.
Wow.
Doesn't go into detail. I'm sure the budget that comes out tomorrow for our listeners yesterday will have some more information about what is being cut in specific programs, hopefully, and then we can gather our forces and then lobby Congress to tell them, hey, this budget is not good. I mean, We kind of saw this earlier this year with the 2017 budget request that eventually turned into the continuing resolution that we have now until September 30th. That the president requested one thing and Congress said, thank you, but no thanks, and threw it in the trash and started from scratch. The problem with the 2018 budget, why they might not be able to do that, is because although they were able to with the 2017, not as much was riding on this. This is the 2018 budget request is going to be this president's first budget request. This is going to really test the administration on their ability to get things done that fit within their priorities. And as it looks, they aren't going to be able to do that. They haven't been able to do that since. I mean, you have the American Health Care Act, which is just floundering in the Senate now. ACA. Ugh.
Yeah.
Yeah. They should have really picked a better acronym.
They should have really made a better bill.
Yeah. That's what they should have been working on.
So.
But yeah, I mean, like this budget request, this 2018 budget request, cuts a lot from NASA. So I'm looking at my spreadsheet where I did some sort of impromptu analysis on this. And I compared it to the continuing resolution that was enacted for up through September 30th, which is when the fiscal year ends, and the 2016 enacted budget. And basically we are losing across the board except in 3 areas. We are not losing in safety, security, and mission assurance, the Office of the Inspector General, and in the Construction and Environmental Compliance Division. And so what that's telling me, and these aren't necessarily huge increases, but they are fairly significant. I mean, for construction, it's a $135 million increase from last year's budget of $360 million up to $496 million. For the Office of the Inspector General, already a small program with last year, or the 2017 CR, having it at about $37.9 million, that is, going up to $39.3 million. And then for safety, security, and mission assurance, a pretty sizable chunk of the budget was $2.7 million or $2.7 billion last year, and it's going to be $2.83 billion under this current request, which sort of says to me that the administration sees NASA as something that could stay the course in building this infrastructure. So that's your construction division of NASA, building new infrastructure, refurbishing facilities like Michoud and Kennedy, which were hit with some pretty severe weather in the last year, increasing the budget of the Inspector General so that they can inspect more things, less generally, more specifically, I guess, and ensuring safe launches and operation of satellites on orbit. However, everything else, the exploration budget gets a huge cut of $389.9 million. The education budget, so this spreadsheet that we're working off of, great, remember folks, if you're listening on Wednesday, that this request that we're looking at now has the education budget with $37.3 million. I
feel like the NPR Politics Hour podcast. By the time this airs, things may change.
Yeah, just a total disclaimer.
Yes.
But so the education budget up in the announced budget proposal back in February, they said that they were going to cut the education division completely, and it seems like that's going to be the case. This spreadsheet that we're working off of from May 8th still has money in the education budget. It seems like that is going to be cut completely. Like there will not be a Office of Education at NASA. That doesn't mean there isn't education programs. Each of the directorates, so the Science Mission Directorate, namely, has an education budget roughly the same size as the Office of Education, within NASA. But what is under the Office of Education is the administration of the space grants, which every state there is the coalition, or not coalition, the group that administers space grants to universities and students, giving, these are the scholarship grants and fellowships at either NASA facilities or at NASA sponsored
but that's at the
programs.
University level, though. I mean, what as far as STEM, that Office of Education was key in starting or aiding in STEM programs around the United States, and that's really where.
So that's where one of the other big cuts is. But that space grant consortium, that was the word I'm looking for, consortium. That getting cut is huge because there's nothing else within NASA right now that could pick up that load. I mean, that's thousands, if not, close to millions of students that rely on some amount of that funding to either continue their research, fund their professors doing their research, or even keep their universities going. So this budget is abysmal.
Sad.
It's very sad.
Yes.
Now, I agree that a conversation needs to happen about some programs within NASA. And we have those conversations every week, in fact. But this is not the right way to do it.
Right. There's rational cutting versus what seems to be ideology-based ideology-based slashing of programs. I mean, cutting Earth sciences by that much is that there's no way there was that much waste in the Earth sciences program at NASA. I'm sorry.
NASA has some of I can't remember the number, but it is one of the highest rated programs or agencies, if I remember correctly, that uses government funds correctly. I mean, of course, there's things that slip through the cracks, but on the whole, NASA and even really the entire federal government is pretty good on corruption, except for 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
I mean, I'm not going to say that every single agency is great at spending. I mean, I'm not going to call out specific agencies that I know of that aren't, but NASA is from every reports. I mean, there are sort of these anecdotal reports about, for every $1 you get in, you get like $4, like ridiculous things that people have claimed. But there's no doubt that NASA has not only produced things like spin-offs that have impacted the American economy, but they've had other forms of science return that sort of sit on that tree of knowledge that has produced new technologies, new feats of engineering that we still use today. And to cut one of the most impactful agencies on the planet, one of the most impactful government agencies on the planet in terms of increasing the world's scientific world's scientific knowledge base. It's pretty abysmal. So
yeah, I mean, what I've sort of been thinking, there is all this talk about spin-off technology, and I mean, we had a whole episode on it. There's talk about, that return on investment, the ROI being, for every dollar that you spend on NASA, you get $4. I've heard even as big as $9 or $13.
Yeah,
back.
Those are hard. Those
so
comparisons are hard
to pin down that number.
And that's a part of why it's hard to, for lack of a better term, sell this to every congressman, as we've tried to do.
We've tried to do multiple times.
Yeah, on multiple occasions.
But if you're going into funding scientific research or funding the exploration of humans or the human exploration of outer space, if you're going into it thinking that you're going to be getting some return on investment in 2 years, 10 years, 15 years, you're not thinking about this the right way. I mean, this is like NASA's job isn't to make money. NASA's job
nor is that the job of any agency in the federal government.
Exactly. It's not their job to create spin-off technologies. It's not their job to have some sort of, this exchange of goods and services for what those tax dollars are being spent on. I mean, for NASA, you are sending probes, people, satellites to places that we have never gone before to increase our understanding of not only those places, but our place in the universe. What you're spending your tax dollars on is not on buying the next iPhone gadget or your new app. It's developing the technologies that could then propel us further into the stars and also solve some of our biggest problems here terrestrially. That's the job of NASA is not to bring money back. The job of NASA is to push us forward. And it has done so amazingly in the past. And it is one of the best brands that the United States has. I mean, we were talking about this tonight for the Planetary Society event that, of the world's most recognizable symbols. The top ones are McDonald's, Mickey Mouse, NASA, and Coca-Cola. Like, if you ask anybody across the planet, what do you associate with space exploration? What do you associate with inspiring people? What do you associate with the moon? Plenty of people, a majority of people will tell you NASA.
So we'll see what happens next week. I mean, I don't want to rant too long about a bill that hasn't come out yet.
Or that very well, by the time that this episode airs, is already going to be in the dustbin,
right.
for Congress. So if you're listening to this and that has not happened, and this actually has some traction on the Hill, please call your member of Congress, especially if they're on the Appropriations Committee.
Absolutely. So, got anything else to say on the Space News Highlight?
No, I think that is it. That might be the shortest Space News Highlight segment that we have done yet.
Think so, but it was important. It was definitely important to at least highlight it, just to kind of see what's to come and get some pre-rage out of us and what will be post-rage out of the listener. We'll be hearing about this budget for months at this point, and you're going to hear it everywhere from the news to other podcasts to coffee shop conversation. We don't want to be another two guys droning on about something that hasn't even happened yet. Right. So moving on to international news, and as far as international, this one concerns the ISS, so it kind of wins on a technicality. But hurriedly planned contingency spacewalk is on tap for Tuesday. So I got a notification about this yesterday. But Space Station Commander Peggy Whitson and astronaut Jack Fisher are set for a 2.5-hour spacewalk on Tuesday, a quickly planned excursion to replace a recently installed external computer that failed on Saturday. The 50-pound data relay box, known as a multiplexer demultiplexer, or MDM, is one of two Tier 2 command and control computers mounted in the station's power truss that route commands to a variety of critical systems and relay telemetry from those systems to the ground. While the one operational Tier 2 MDM can handle the full load, NASA managers opted to replace the failed box as soon as possible to restore full redundancy to the space station. So basically this is not something that's happening today. It's going to be happening on Tuesday, once again, in the future for us, in the past for our listeners. And Peggy Whitson, who recently broke a record for spending over 534 days in space, is going to go on yet another spacewalk. She was recently on a spacewalk about 11 days ago, about 11 days before Tuesday, on May 12th. Where they even had to switch their spacesuits to battery power to kick off another spacewalk. So Peggy Whitson going at it. Best of luck to them. I'm hoping that they have a safe walk and a safe return to the space station.
Yeah. They'll have a well-deserved welcoming ceremony.
Yeah.
When they come back, not only to the station but back down to the Earth.
Right. There's so much less controversy after the space news highlight of the week.
I know, it's like it's everything like, sort of.
I'm just like, and they're doing this
slow going
and now. Best of luck.
So an item that I added in just seconds ago.
Oh, breaking by
breaking
Jack.
news. Well, it's not really breaking news. It was about an hour ago.
Oh,
it was the second delay of the Rocket Lab launch out of New Zealand. So Rocket Lab is a Los Angeles-based company. They are developing the Electron rocket. It is a small. So if you've heard people talk about SpaceX rockets or ULA rockets as being medium plus, heavy, super heavy, all that stuff. Well, this is a small. This is a baby rocket. It's bigger than a sounding rocket, so it's not just going to go straight up and back down. It's actually going to be able to hit orbital velocity and launch things into orbit. But it is trying to take advantage of this small sat revolution that seems to be happening, or at least we're told is happening, of sending up small satellites for as cost saving measures, because what you would need a large satellite 10 years ago for, you probably could do that on a CubeSat now. Allows rapid turnaround of technological innovation on satellites, and allows you to test materials and test technology up in space for larger satellites later on. As it stands, NASA has implemented their more or less ride sharing program on their launches. So when SpaceX launches a satellite, you might also hear that there are secondary satellites on board, and those they usually announce when they get jettisoned and get put into their own orbits while you're watching the main payload get into its orbit. That's sort of what is happening right now for the small sat companies. But what Rocket Lab's trying to do is revolutionize that and start launching smaller rockets for smaller payloads.
Right. They're trying to they're trying to launch payloads of about 330 pounds to about a 500 kilometer sun synchronous orbit. And to give you an idea of how small these rockets are, that are being used to aid the small sat movement. The rocket is a 2-stage rocket that's about with both stages having about a 1.2 meter diameter filled with propellant. So these are very small rockets that will hopefully reduce the cost of getting CubeSats to orbit. So as opposed to sending some massive rocket up that we just happen to have in stock, using this 150 kilogram this rocket that can carry 150 kilogram payload for about a $4.9 million cost. So it's a huge cost saving measure on the part of some small satellite manufacturers. I mean, this could really help. And what's so cool about Rocket Lab, so this is their first test on a newly built launch pad in New Zealand. It is on the Mahia Peninsula in Hawke's Bay, so it's on the, if I can remember correctly, it's on the eastern side of the North Island. Mm-hmm. So where Auckland is, if I'm remembering correctly. Correct me if I'm wrong, Newton. I would have to Google it.
But yeah, so this is actually one of the first launch sites in the Southern Hemisphere. So something that we talked about before, especially in regards to the James Webb Space Telescope, is launching from the equator is where you want to launch from. That's like the most ideal launch location. Most launch facilities are not on the equator. A lot of them are in the Northern Hemisphere. I don't think there's actually any other active launch site in the Southern Hemisphere other than this one in New Zealand now.
Well, wait, when you say this one, you mean
from Rocket Lab's Mahia Peninsula launch site?
Well, I mean, Ariane Spas has Does that technically qualify as the equator, French Guiana?
I think, isn't it north of the equator still?
Pretty sure it's not. Let me.
Well, I would still consider that to be an equatorial.
Yeah.
Like it's between the two tropics.
Yeah.
That would that allow it to launch to equatorial orbits and use that advantage that we've talked about at the equator. But the southern hemisphere does not have any other launch facilities, as far as I'm aware,
right?
Or at least active ones.
Beyond that, at least not for extensive launch to low Earth orbit.
Yeah.
So.
And as New Zealand then starts getting into this this commercial race to space, we have already started seeing Australia make moves to establish their own independent space agency. A lot of the southern hemisphere is going to start entering into the space race. I know Brazil is attempting to, as well as some other South American countries, because it's that way of the future. It's these high-tech, high-paying jobs that they can bring to their countries that then can help revolutionize old areas of industry.
Yeah.
As industry starts to get more automated and less reliant on human input, humans under our current economic system still need somewhere to work in order to have food to eat. So these high-tech, high-paying jobs are the way of the future for a lot of these countries in the global South.
Yeah. Great. So, best of luck to Rocket Labs and the Electron rocket. All right. So moving forward to latest in tech, we got a couple stories to go. So first up, NASA tests origami-inspired robot that may one day explore Mars. And that should probably say one day explore Mars or Europa or Enceladus, et cetera, et cetera. So
explore the solar system.
Explore the solar system, maybe beyond. But we won't get too antsy. So in this month's IEEE Spectrum magazine, by the way, IEEE stands for the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers and is the world's largest technical professional organization. They highlighted in their magazine this month the Puffer, NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory's pop-up exploring robot. Now, Puffer is an acronym that stands for Pop-Up Flat Folding Explorer Robot. So the problem that JPL was trying to solve here is that, as we know, it costs a stupid amount of money to send objects from the surface of Earth to the surface of Mars. Now, one key variable in that cost equation is typically mass. That's the one that we most commonly think about. So, for example, there was a story last year, or I think it was in late 2015, where the Royal Mail, the UK's postal service, got an inquiry from a 5-year-old boy, Oliver Giddings, asking how much it would cost to send a letter from Earth to Mars. Well, the Royal Mail, consulted NASA. They called up NASA and asked how much would that cost. So NASA actually ran the numbers on the cost of sending a 100-gram letter to one of NASA's bases and then to transport it to a site on Mars. And you know the answer they got? 11,602 pounds and 25 pence, which is about the equivalent of $17,500 in the US.
Now, is that standard postage?
I think they overnighted it, which is probably why it costs so much. That's crazy, right?
Express box.
So mass, as we all know, is a huge issue when sending massive objects from Earth to Mars, and it's something we have to think about even when we're not just sending humans. But moving away from that tangent, another key variable to consider besides mass is volume. In order to stuff the maximum amount of science and lab experiments into the minimum amount of space, NASA's had to get creative with landers and rovers designed to be lightweight and foldable. So the overall idea with this puffer robot is that it's designed to pack down nearly flat for transport and then re-expand on site to investigate all the places a bigger rover can't quite reach. So you pack a bunch of them along with the next Mars rover and send them out whenever you want to go somewhere that's too risky for the larger billion-dollar rover to go. That includes places like dunes of deep sand, steep sides of a crater on Mars, or anywhere else that a larger rover simply can't fit. And that makes a lot of sense. I mean, Mars Curiosity rover was about the size of a small SUV and had a ton of clunky science equipment on it. This is something that will really help us to explore some of the harder to get to places on different planets and our own planet, to tell you the truth. So yeah, the puffer technology is originally based on the concept of origami robots, and I guess I could talk a little bit about sort of recent innovations with origami robots. This is a technology that I remember hearing about back in 2014, about 2014, 2013 timeframe. The key to allowing an origami robot to structure itself from a flat piece of cardboard is a very carefully computed folding design. You combine that design with a structure comprised of resistive circuits embedded in flexible printed circuit boards, flexible circuit boards between layers of paper and heat activated shape memory polymer. Okay, and all that means is that it uses smart materials that have the ability to return from a deformed state to their original shape based on temperature change. So effectively, this paper sandwich is laser cut where those joints will be. And when the embedded resistors heat up, the shape memory polymer around them contracts. And depending on how and where those cuts were made, this contraction results in permanently controlled bending. So it allows you to bend the different flaps on the robot, which permits folding. So these flexible joints come from cutting out both the paper and that shape memory polymer, leaving just the flexible circuit board to connect different structural elements of the robot. Now, all of that was the easy part. So comfortable with that?
That sounded so easy to me.
Right. Yeah.
I did that last week. You know?
Yeah. I figured I want you to make me one by next week. But the really hard part here is the design of the origami structure, which is done obviously by a computer program, and the manufacturing of the composite sheet. Once the composite's completed, the final assembly step just involves attaching the batteries, motors, and like the microcontroller to the robot using something like a 3D printed motor mount and some screws. So the funny thing is, and they mentioned this in the original IEEE article, is that when you talk about technology like origami robots, the best that we can usually say is that it's an abstract concept that may at some point help with disaster relief or exploration or something like that. But with Puffer, the new robot that JPL is working on, JPL is really taking the next step, saying, okay, how can we make these technologies actually do something useful? So this is something that could work on either Mars or in true, real life disaster areas here on Earth. So right now, the Puffer project, which looks like they just ended the prototype program at the end of March, created a number of prototype capabilities to reduce risk for developing it on future missions and to just prove its technological feasibility, proving that you can kind of dump these things out, have them unfold, and then move on to different missions. NASA's already tested Puffer on adverse terrain here on Earth, including a volcano in Antarctica, and future trials are planned to test it on different polar regions on the Earth, where Earth scientists can deploy a handful of puffers to see how well they do. So yeah, basically it reduces risk for the larger billion-dollar rover. And I can totally see these being used and built cheaply here on Earth. I mean, this could be the cheap robot, almost a GoPro, that everyone's been waiting for if this type of technology was commercialized. if we have drones right now, and those are great, but they come with, a million different regulations that the FAA is still trying to figure out. So, how much are you really going to regulate tiny robots that are rolling around on the ground?
And then on the topic of the drones, I mean, if you're sending these to Mars, drones that work in the Earth's atmosphere don't necessarily work in the Martian atmosphere.
Very true.
So developing new technologies for that is another hassle. Whereas things with wheels work here probably just as well as things with wheels work over there.
Yeah.
I mean, you have a different amount of gravity to contend with, but that seems to be the only the only challenge other than terrain.
Right.
And I mean, this adds so much more capabilities. And if these were able to be infused with some sort of artificial intelligence, machine learning, autonomous ability, you could deploy these and, say, this is what you're looking for. This is NASA HQ telling these robots, this is what you're looking for. This is the area we want you to investigate. And the robots could kind of do it on their own. They could be like a Roomba for Mars, except they don't clean things. They inspect, grains of sand and dust.
They've got a lot of dust to pick up on Mars. That's
it's horrible.
Yeah.
It's horrible.
Yeah.
But I mean, this could be something that helps make future robotic missions, precursor missions to human exploration, all the more cost effective and give us a better return on our investment in science.
Well, even think about some of the things that we're talking about for future missions that we've tried to some extent we've tried to have those missions to some extent, but they were just limited by the fact that we had the same large clunky object conducting the mission. But think about if we had an asteroid lander where you would have something land on the asteroid and deploy a few hundred of these to really get into sort of the crevices of that asteroid, give them sensors for detecting some of the composite makeup of the asteroid and just feeding that data back. I mean, if you could start producing these as throwaways, I mean, you're going to see these not only all littered all over the planet, but all over the solar system.
Oh yeah, I mean, you of course there's the problem, clean up your space trash. Yeah. But I mean, these also open up the possibility of going into places, a one-time journey for these, one way into volcanic chambers on Mars or through cracks in the ice on Europa. I mean, these are places that we cannot explore conventionally. So we need this unconventional technology to help us explore these areas that, I mean, the volcanic chambers on Mars could very well be where the first astronauts build their first, underground shelter. Or on Europa, life could be found in those little crevices where, between the ice sheets where you get enough friction where it creates enough heat and the chemicals, the organic compounds there can come together, and you could very well see these things could be the thing that discovers life on Europa, Enceladus, Titan, any of the number of icy worlds out there, or even Mars.
Right. And as we talked about, I mean, as I said, they have prototype technology out there. As we talked about, a couple of weeks ago when it came to space Ethernet, they're still going to have to deal with problems like having these circuit boards deal with the level of radiation on places that are out there. But I mean, this is a great first look at creating something tangible. I urge you to take a look at the video in the show notes about this new piece of technology coming out of JPL, and just keep an eye out for it, looking for it going forward. I'm sure you're going to see it both commercially here as well as out on Mars. So
on to the next technology that you get to so eloquently explain to me.
Yes. God. So now, as far as latest in tech stories go, the story is going to start out, in the words of John Oliver a few weeks ago, as the equivalent of chasing an Ambien with a shot of chloroform. But I swear it actually has a purpose. So OneWeb, a U.S. satellite startup backed by Japan's SoftBank Group Corporation has increased its merger proposal for Intelsat by offering Intelsat's creditors a smaller discount for their bonds than it had before. Thrilling, right? Now, Intelsat operates the world's first globalized network. The goal of this network is to deliver high quality, cost effective broadband all around the world. So internet everywhere. Intelsat's globalized network combines the world's largest satellite backbone with terrestrial ground stations, terrestrial infrastructure. So they operate a fleet of more than 50 satellites plus teleports for those satellites that provides the world's most extensive and secure communications networks, along with what they call an Intelsat 1 terrestrial network that operates with that interacts with that satellite technology to support hybrid satellite and fiber connectivity with access to multiple platforms and teleports. OneWeb, on the other hand, is a global communications company founded by a gentleman by the name of Greg Weiler and is actually located near us in Arlington, Virginia. I actually thought about applying there when I was shopping around for jobs. They actually plan to launch the OneWeb satellite constellation, which is a network of about 648 low Earth orbit microsatellites starting in late 2017. And their business model is to basically have other companies use that satellite network, or to just sell or to just sell access or sell permanent use of that satellite network. Now, OneWeb announced back in February that it planned to combine with Intelsat. You could imagine Intelsat's desire to get a hold of a network of 648 satellites in LEO. After Intelsat's bondholders resisted a debt swap necessary for the merger to close, the parties reached an impasse. Intelsat has since they've since extended the exchange deadlines multiple times, and both parties seem to be getting frustrated. Last week, SoftBank was said to be close to walking away from the deal as the gap between the two parties seemed too wide. OneWeb and Intelsat's merger has been stalled because Intelsat's debt investors have not been willing to accept the $3.6 billion haircut on the bonds that the deal requires. OneWeb's new offer reduces the concessions Intelsat's bondholders must accept to about $2.85 billion. So that's about a $0.75 billion cut. Now, something will happen with this. Either Intelsat will go with SoftBank OneWeb, or SoftBank will sell off the use of their constellation to someone else like Canada's Telesat or the Paris-based Eutelsat. But either way, they'll move on to something else. Nonetheless, this story draws a sharp contrast to one of the biggest stories that got skipped over in the cluster that was U.S. news last week, which is net neutrality. Took a long way to get there.
Oh dear, I saw the headline. I saw a couple headlines that said,
and that was about it.
Repeal Obama era net neutrality, and I don't even think I read any of them because I was like, I can't deal with this with everything else that's been going on this last week.
Yeah, it's been insane. It was the cherry on top. All right, so for listeners who haven't really been abreast of what's been going on with net neutrality, or who are just kind of confused about the entire issue, net neutrality debate is maybe the biggest internet argument or Twitter beef of all. All right, and it's been going on since the late 1990s. In 1996, Congress passed what's called the Telecom Act, leading the FCC to classify cable broadband providers as information services rather than telecommunication services, which would have been subject to much stricter regulation. The FCC did, however, in 2010 pass the Open Internet Order, which prohibited ISPs from blocking, throttling, or offering paid prioritization. That's the whole notion of fast lanes and prioritizing some groups over some traffic over other traffic on the internet. And it wasn't because the FCC didn't do this just because they felt like regulating. Verizon in particular started this talk about fast lanes and prioritizing traffic for certain internet organizations over others, kind of reducing the overall notion of a free and open internet. Now, at the time of this recording, the night of Monday, May 22nd, the current status of net neutrality in the U.S. is that back on May 18th, the FCC voted to overturn Obama administration-era rules, forcing internet service providers to be regulated by the FCC's net neutrality rules. There was a 2-1 vote that reversed the 2015 vote that reclassified internet service as a public utility under Title II of the Communications Act of 1934. At the time, many argued that only Congress could give the FCC that kind of power, but right now, Title II is the strongest legal foundation that we have for strong, enforceable net neutrality protections. Now, when fully staffed, the FCC is directed by 5 commissioners who are nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate for 5-year terms, except when filling an unexpired term. The U.S. president decides which commissioner will serve as chairman, and only 3 commissioners can be members of the same political party. So the FCC sways between 3 members of one party and 2 from the other party, depending on who is in the White House. Right now, however, there are 2 vacancies, so it's 2 Republicans to 1 Democrat, hence your 2-1 vote. Ajit Pai, the current head of the FCC, some of you may have heard his name, mostly surrounded by swear words. He's arguing that rules enforcing net neutrality hamper job growth and discourage investment. And the public's critics of net neutrality, because there are people who criticize net neutrality that are just regular, everyday citizens subject to gang mentality, they're skeptical. Because though net neutrality can sound like a protection of internet freedom, and ideally it should be, we all know that allowing internet regulation by the government is tyrannical and damning to free speech. It's this notion that we should trust the market over the democratically elected government. If the FCC went back to pre-2010 regulations, as far as options go, the Federal Trade Commission would actually be the one to regain its status as the enforcer of those rules. But the FTC, Federal Trade Commission's rules are not as strong as the FCC's. And many companies that provide internet and also provide a common carrier service, like phone lines, for instance, would be exempt from FTC regulation, thanks to a ruling in a recent Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals case. The second option that we have would be to cut off all of this FCC squabbling by using congressional action. A new law could give the FCC clear regulatory control over net neutrality issues without regulating ISPs as utilities. So just giving FCC fine-grained control so that if they wanted to make fast lanes, we could do it in a way that's actually reasonable and, is sanctioned, effectively by the people. But we all know that's not going to happen with this Congress. So
yeah, they have a budget to worry about, I think.
Yeah, that would be a complete fight in its own right. But there is a third option, and this option is the only reason why you're hearing about net neutrality on a space podcast, and that's this notion of space-based internet. I mean, this is why I brought up OneWeb in the first place, with their mission to give OneWeb and Intelsat's mission to give broadband to people around the world, not even just in America, but all around the globe. While Verizon and Comcast are trying to hold on to the last subscribers of cable television and internet, companies like Intelsat, OneWeb, SpaceX, even Facebook are trying to give people access to high quality broadband. Now, will the service be comparable to what those two offer right away? Like to what Verizon and Comcast offer right away? No way.
Well, it'll beat out Comcast for certain.
Yeah. Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean,
Anything
nobody
could.
And yeah, I'm pretty sure just me sending your messages from my house to your house could be Comcast.
Just walking over here with a piece of paper.
Right, exactly. That's high bandwidth, but that's another story. That's for my BBM listeners. No, but building a robust space-based infrastructure as alternatives for most people could be the way that we get out of this. Like I said, it's right away, it's not going to be the optimal choice, but other companies start getting it on the ground floor. We start regulating space and space-based services like this. It at least presents us with another option for this. And Jack, I'm pretty sure you've been hearing about a lot of this on the policy side. I know probably not last week, but I mean, what are people on the space policy side thinking about this?
Specifically about so the big concern, I think, within the space community right now, and I think just across the board, like just in government, is we don't want to be crowding up the space out there. Right. And there's only finite amount of space, and that means that there's only finite number of orbits, a finite amount of angles that you can get from space in order to, offer, internet access to, as I guess I'll use the name of another company, the other 3 billion, bringing internet access to the people who don't have regular internet access, whether that's because the infrastructure is not there, or the costs are too high for where they are, that it's prohibitive. The problem being that we actually saw this before the .com boom. There was another skeptical, a skeptics market, where a bunch of companies, a lot of them defunct, Iridium being one of the only ones that's still sort of around to this day, had this idea back in the 80s and 90s to fill the sky with orbiting satellites that would act as relays for at the time what it was satellite phones. But then with the advent, with the invention of the cell system that made that entirely defunct.
Sure.
And a lot of companies went out of business. A lot of people lost a lot of money in the mid to late 90s. And we're starting to see that happen again here, but with more precaution. Back then, 20, 30 years ago, the sky was the limit, I guess, pun intended. But now with that in mind, we see a lot slower progression of this technology or of the business plan, whereas the technology is being developed at a more rapid pace for less cost. So the big problem on the government side is going to be, how do you regulate, a constellation of 700 satellites, as Elon Musk has proposed, for his space-based internet service? I mean, if you have even 3 companies, say you have your Facebook, your OneWeb, and SpaceX all have 700 satellite constellations, that's 2,100 new objects in orbit, let alone all the things that go up with them, like the second stage of a rocket. Though they would be in such a low orbit, you could probably only get there with one stage. You probably would want to anyway.
Plus, they'd all come on the same Falcon 9. We all know that. Come on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But I mean, there's the extra space junk that you have to worry about, and with this small sat revolution, this kind of ties into our Rocket Lab conversation. If all of these are just CubeSats with a radar dish on one side of it, or whatever the technology is when they launch them, you might not have a very good tracking system on them. So you might rely already on an already stressed national security network that monitors space traffic, that is trying to track the tens of thousands of objects in orbit right now, and you add on a couple thousand more. That's just going to,
I mean, that's a problem we're dealing with anyway, though. That's
a problem that's going to be dealt with anyway with things like Space Fence. But we shouldn't have to rely on that, entirely. Like there should be a set of regulations in place that say, yes, you have to have a tracker on your satellite. You have to, you are the one who are in charge of it. Like, whether it's the FAA, or, whoever it ends up being, monitors space traffic, like, an air traffic controller might be, that it's the job of the company to install the tracker and everything on their spacecraft. But I think I think the biggest concern that I see, at least from my perspective.
I think it's a good decision. I think that's a good both. It's a legitimate concern, and I think it's a good discussion to have to some extent, because these kinds of constellations can be seen as a form of global critical infrastructure, right? Giving people internet access isn't just great because now they can all watch Netflix. I mean, we've seen the benefits of giving people internet access both from the emergency services standpoint, as well as just reporting what's occurring in a nation state that's locked down their internet, right? So how do you go about prioritizing, or even begin to go about prioritizing, can this organization launch 1,000 satellites if they if they have the backing and if they so choose, based on this seemingly justifiable reason? At some point, in my opinion, we are going to we should have internet worldwide.
Oh,
right?
Absolutely. I 130,000% agree with you. I don't like
right. And a terrestrial solution is not going to cut it, right? Just solely using fiber everywhere.
Imagine some, village in Africa or India, or, in the middle of Siberia, and you have, Google employees laying fiber down. Like, that's just not going to cut it to give internet access to 300 people, maybe.
Yeah.
When you can, for, maybe the same cost, provide internet access to, 300,000 people from orbit. I mean, it might not immediately be the same level of access as access to fiber would be, but it's access.
Right. And that's the key. We're not stating that, and to be honest, most people don't use that much bandwidth. I mean, the creation or the popularization of things like Netflix and some other digital streaming services have certainly increased it. That is most of the network traffic that is out there at any given moment, but that's primarily because those services require so much internet traffic. I mean, what most people commonly are doing are surfing the web, using Twitter, using Facebook, any of those social medias. With one correction, there are a number of social media that are starting to use more and more data services like Snapchat, or Instagram, but nonetheless, the day-to-day operations of most people on the internet, check email, check your social, do an update on social media, and or look up some random thing. That's about it.
Yeah. When does the next episode of Ad Astra come out?
Right, exactly. Yeah, I mean, download Ad Astra just nonstop and listening to it, and
that might take up a bit of your
giving 5-star reviews on iTunes. I mean, that's most internet day-to-day operations.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, I think maybe last little point that I got is just I mean, this is what would make America great. It'd be inventing internet access, a way to provide internet access to every person on the planet. Yeah. I mean, it's going to be integral to life beyond the 21st century. To deny people access is to deny them access to standard of living that the global North might enjoy, and denying it to the global South.
Yeah. Yeah.
Furthering that divide between the haves and the have-nots. I could ramble on about this, but I think we're nearing the hour and 30-minute mark.
Not terrible.
Not horrible.
Yeah.
But I think we should talk about our last topic of the day, which is the first trailer for the new Star Trek Discovery.
So the trailer has been up on YouTube, I want to say, since Saturday is when this came out. Yeah. So this is for Star Trek Discovery. This new show is going to follow a commander, a first commander, if I can talk, rather than a sophisticated captain, which is the first time that the show has ever done that. It's going to actually follow Sonequa Martin Green. Sonequa Martin Green is going to be that first captain. First commander. I will be able to talk, I swear. Some of you may remember her from The Walking Dead. She was recently on The Walking Dead. I won't give any spoilers about what happened to her, but it is The Walking Dead.
So she made it up fine.
Yeah. But she will be, the show is basically going to follow her adventures on the new craft called Discovery. What'd you think of the trailer overall?
So I am extremely excited to get back into Star Trek. I like the new movies, but to me, Star Trek, if I want to go to the movies and see a space themed, episodic almost type show, not show, but a space themed movie, I'm going to go see Star Wars. But to me, if I want a regular, whether it's weekly, bi-weekly, binge watch an entire season in one weekend of space-based TV show, Star Trek all the way. I mean, it's nice to see that it's coming back after so many years of being absent. The last Star Trek wasn't Voyager, was it? It was Deep Space
Nine. Star Trek? Oh God.
Yeah, the last show.
I want to say it wasn't. Wow. I see. I am not the world's greatest Star Trek fan, right? Like, I watched
neither
the
am
original.
I. So we're gonna get yelled at in the comments of this
Next
video.
Gen and then right, okay, yeah, we'll get letters. We'll take your letters over not knowing what the last Star Trek was.
Yeah, and we will apologize publicly next episode.
Yeah,
but I am very excited to see this.
It's
show.
Good, and it's interesting you bring up the movies. I am not in the camp of, the movies were terrible because they weren't like Star Trek. Look, a movie should I understand that the Star Trek, each Star Trek series, it really promoted profound social lessons, things like that. But in reality, a movie's only going to do that a couple of times before it starts to seem overly preachy. But with that said, this is actually something that I've been hoping for because I was kind of tired of the Star Trek movies. I thought the most recent one was actually pretty good. The one that was directed by Justin Lin.
Beyond.
Yeah. Star Trek Beyond. Yeah, I thought that one was pretty good. Justin Lin directed it. He also directed the Fast in the Furious movies, but I thought it was really well done. But once again, I get my action movie fill from all the Marvel movies we watch, Star Wars, all of those things. Whereas I think more of a TV show is what I'm looking for out of my Star Trek, to be honest with you.
I'm the same way.
Yeah. Here's the only issue with all of this. The new Star Trek series, Star Trek Discovery, is only going to be available on CBS All Access, for which you have to pay $5.99 a month for access with limited commercials, or $10 a month without commercials. To which I say I'm not going to have Tom bleep out my next statement. So I'm just not going to say it. But
make more work for him.
Yeah. I'm sure we shall find another way to see it. But with that said, yeah.
Well, yeah, we'll just have a watch party with someone who owns a subscription to CBS All Access.
Yeah, CBS All Access, I guarantee, will get $5.99 a month. And that's it. Like that's it. That's all they're getting total. Everyone's going to be using the exact same account.
What was it? There was that. There was I think it was a College Humor video or something a couple years ago where everyone was using the same HBO Go password, and like it was people is the kid calls their dad and is like, "Hey, what's the HBO Go password?" And he has to then call the next person, and eventually gets to like the president of the United States, like Barack Obama, and it gets to him, and he's like, I have to call someone. And he keeps calling back through the presidents or something.
Hilarious.
It was, I could see that happening.
Yeah, no kidding. But yeah, I would like to see the new Star Trek series, but likelihood of me getting CBS All Access, like for one show, because what other show on CBS am I really going to watch? They do, however, have all of the other Star Trek series on CBS. But last I checked, many of those were on Netflix. Is that still the case?
I am not. I think they definitely took some of them off.
I wouldn't be surprised if they took quite a bit of them down through some deal with CBS. But
yeah,
do they really think people are going to pay? Like, I don't want to see this flop. Here's the thing. I don't want to see this flop for multiple reasons. One, I don't want people... And this is not in order of prioritization. Just one, I don't want people, going, oh, people don't want a Star Trek series. That's why this wasn't watched. And I also don't want people going, oh, this is what happens when you put on a show with a black female lead. Like the people just don't want it. It's $5.99 a month that you're forcing people to pay that's going to be keeping people away from this.
Yeah, it's the paywall. It's not the content.
Yeah, and the problem is Hollywood tends to learn the wrong lessons at times. So I don't know. We'll see. We will see. We'll see how this turns out. But yeah, new Star Trek for anyone who's interested. That's what's coming soon to space. I've got nothing left in coming soon to space. But
yep, and that's it for me. Okay. So I guess we will sign off on this episode. Again, everyone, make sure you go follow us on Twitter at @Astra_podcast. Like us on Facebook. We have an Instagram. Go to elemental.fm to get regular updates from the team. Review us on iTunes. The regular spiel. Again, congratulations to Katie Spencer.
Also, we'll leave comments. We'll leave show notes about how you can make FCC comments about net neutrality, and I'll point you to some ridiculous tweets that Comcast and Verizon were both trying to send out, stating that net neutrality isn't such a bad thing. They're kind of hilarious. Sorry, go on, Jack.
Okay, well, yeah, that'll be good. I will certainly send in my comments. But yeah, so again, congratulations to Katie Spencer for winning David Grinspoon's newest book, Earth in Human Hands. We will do a photo op with her when we hand off the book, as well as some more promotions in the near future. So as always, I'm Jack.
And I'm Newton.
Ad Astra.